Death isn't a bright light or a choir of angels. It's the sterile beep of a heart monitor fading while your husband texts his mistress, your best friend, about cashing in the life insurance. That was my exit. But fate is a sick comedian. Waking up 5 years in the past-breathing air that didn't smell like hospital bleach gave me one clear objective. Marriage is a trap. This time, I'm letting my bestie take the bait. Staring down at the blue ink staining the tip of the heavy silver pen, a violent shiver rattled my spine. The smell of roasted Arabica beans and burnt milk flooded my lungs. My pulse hammered against my throat, rapid and terrifyingly strong. Just a second ago, the scent was antiseptic. The sound was a flatlining electrocardiogram. The last sight, etched into my failing retinas, was my fiancé Ben, failing to hide a smirk while standing over my hospital bed. His fingers were laced tightly with Sarah's. Sarah, who had held my hair back when we were drunk college freshmen. Sarah, who was currently wearing the diamond tennis bracelet missing from my jewelry box. They had leaned over my bed, whispering about the life insurance payout. The payout that would finally clear the crushing, suffocating mountain of debt Ben had buried us under. A stress-induced aneurysm took my life at 31, fueled entirely by the panic of losing our home to his creditors. Yet, here I was. Sunlight glared through the fogged glass of the corner coffee shop. Dust motes danced in the beam, illuminating the thick stack of papers on the table. "Babe, you okay? You spaced out for a second." The voice made my stomach heave. I blinked, forcing the world into focus. Ben sat across from me. He looked younger, unburdened by the dark circles and the desperate manic edge that would define his face in our final years. He wore his favorite navy sweater, the one I bought him for his 25th birthday. His hair was perfectly styled, exuding that effortless charm that had blinded me for so long. Next to him sat Sarah. She was leaning forward, her elbows on the table, offering me a tight, encouraging smile. Her eyes, though, darted to the papers. "Come on, Chloe," Sarah urged softly, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. "It's just a signature. Ben's app is going to revolutionize delivery logistics. You guys are going to be so rich, you'll forget the little people like me." The memories slammed into me with the force of a freight train. October 14th, 5 years ago. This was the exact day everything went to hell. This was the day I co-signed the small business loan for Ben's tech startup. $250,000 secured against the modest inheritance my grandmother had left me. The startup would hemorrhage cash for 3 years, failing spectacularly because Ben cared more about renting a corner office and hosting lavish investor parties than writing actual code. The stress would bleed me dry. I would take a second job. He would take Sarah to hotel rooms paid for by my credit cards. I looked at the pen in my hand. It felt like a live grenade. "Chloe." Ben reached across the table, his warm hand covering my freezing one. "I know it's scary, but we're a team. This is our future. I can't do this without you." His thumb stroked my knuckles. It was a calculated, practiced movement. He knew exactly how to play the sensitive, vulnerable visionary. For a moment, a wave of profound, exhausted grief washed over me. I had loved him so much. I had trusted this man enough to die for his mistakes. I pulled my hand back slowly. The pen clattered onto the wooden table, the sound unnaturally loud over the low hum of the cafe chatter. No, the word tasted foreign. It was quiet, but it hung in the air like smoke. Ben frowned his handsome features, pulling into a mask of confused patience. No. What did you miss a page? No, I'm not signing it. I pushed my chair, back the wooden legs, scraping harshly against the tile floor. My legs felt shaky, but my head was clearer than it had been in a decade. Sarah let out a small, breathless laugh, looking between us. Chloe, stop joking. The notary is meeting us at the bank in 20 minutes. I'm entirely serious. I looked directly at Sarah. The fake concern on her face made my skin crawl, but I forced my expression to remain perfectly neutral. I don't understand tech, Sarah. You know this. I'm a risk-averse accountant. Ben needs someone who truly believes in his vision, someone who understands the hustle. Ben's face flushed. The mask slipped just a fraction, revealing the petulant child underneath. We talked about this for months. You promised me. You said you had my back. Things change, Ben. I kept my voice flat. No anger. Anger meant I still cared. Apathy was a far stronger armor. I ran the numbers again last night. It doesn't make sense. The collateral alone puts me at a completely unbalanced risk. I love you, but I won't go into $250,000 of debt for an app that doesn't have a working prototype. It's an investment, he hissed, leaning forward, his voice dropping to keep the other patrons from hearing. You're punishing me because I don't want a boring, safe corporate job like yours. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. I picked up my purse. The leather was worn cheap, a stark contrast to the designer bag Sarah had sitting on the empty chair beside her, a bag she bought using savings that I now knew was cash Ben funneled to her from our joint account. An idea sparked. A beautiful, vicious idea. Actually, Sarah, I said, pausing before I turned away, you've been incredibly supportive of Ben's project. You were just saying how brilliant the business plan is. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. Well, yes, it's a great concept. And your trust fund unlocked last year, right? I tilted my head, feigning innocent realization. Ben, if you need an angel investor, Sarah's the perfect fit. She has the capital, and unlike me, she has the vision to see your potential. Ben looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Ben. For a fraction of a second, I saw it, the unspoken electric current between them. The secret they thought they were hiding so well. That's not... I don't know, Sarah stammered, twisting a strand of her blonde hair. But the greed in her eyes was unmistakable. She loved Ben. But more than that, she loved the idea of being the savior, the wealthy partner of a tech millionaire. Think about it, I said, my voice gentle, almost encouraging. You two make a great team. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the Birchwood Cafe. The crisp autumn air hit my face, smelling faintly of fallen leaves and exhaust fumes. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. I was alive. My bank account was intact. And the trap was set. Packing a 5-year relationship into cardboard boxes takes surprisingly little time when you realize you never actually owned anything together. By the time Ben arrived at our apartment, my apartment, the lease, was in my name. I had already dismantled his life from mine. His clothes, his gaming console, his endless stacks of business strategy books that he never read past chapter 3. They were all sitting by the front door in a small mountain of taped-up liquor store boxes. The front door clicked open. Ben walked in, his face a storm of indignation. He stopped short when he saw the boxes. "What is this?" he demanded, dropping his keys on the entryway table. "Your things," I said. Folding my arms, I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him. I called the landlord. "You're off the lease as of today." I'll cover your half of the rent for this month, but you need to be out by tonight." "Are you insane?" His voice cracked, rising an octave. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the short distance between the sofa and the TV. "Because I got upset at the cafe. Chloe, you humiliated me in front of Sarah. You can't just throw away 5 years because you got cold feet about a loan. It's not just the loan, Ben." I kept my voice eerily calm. "It's the entitlement. It's the constant expectation that I will drain myself to keep you afloat. I'm exhausted. We are done. You can't do this." He stepped closer, changing tactics. The anger vanished, replaced by the puppy dog eyes that used to melt my resolve. He reached for my waist. "Baby, please. I'm stressed. I messed up. I shouldn't have pressured you. But kicking me out. That's crazy. Where am I supposed to go?" I stepped back out of his reach. The physical revulsion I felt was visceral. "Call Sarah. She's always been such a good friend to you." A microscopic flinch, a slight widening of his eyes. If I hadn't lived through the agony of his betrayal, I would have missed it completely. "Why are you bringing Sarah into this?" he asked defensively. "She was just trying to help." "I know she was. That's why she's the perfect person to lean on right now." I grabbed my jacket and keys from the hook. "I'm going for a drive. Be gone when I get back." I spent the next 3 hours sitting in my car by the harbor, watching the gray water lap against the concrete pylons. I pulled out my phone and checked my banking app. Balance, $62,450. It was the inheritance I had guarded so fiercely, the money that was supposed to be a down payment on a house which, in the previous timeline, went directly into the black hole of his vanity project. I transferred everything into a new high-yield account at a completely different bank. I canceled the single joint credit card we shared. I changed the passwords on every digital account I owned. I severed the digital and financial arteries with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. When I returned to the apartment, it was quiet. The boxes were gone. His keys sat on the counter next to a handwritten note that read, "You're going to regret this when I make it big." I laughed out loud. It was a hollow scraping sound, but it felt fantastic. 3 days later, the social media updates began. Sarah posted a heavily filtered photo on Instagram. 2 glasses of champagne at a rooftop bar. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings and big investments. Sometimes you have to step up when others step down. Angel investor, boss babe." I swiped past it, feeling a cold smile touch my lips. She had done it. She had actually co-signed the loan. The dynamic shifted almost immediately. In my past life, Ben had maintained a facade of being an equal partner because he was spending my money. But Sarah wasn't an accountant. Sarah was a trust fund kid who had never balanced a checkbook. She didn't understand that $250,000 was a seed, not a harvest. Within a month, mutual friends began whispering. Ben and Sarah were officially a couple. They claimed it just happened organically after I abandoned Ben in his time of need. They rented a sleek, glass-walled office space downtown that cost $8,000 a month. They hired a branding consultant before they hired a software engineer. I watched it all unfold from a distance, like observing a slow-motion car crash through a soundproof window. I threw myself into my work at the firm. Without the emotional anchor of Ben's constant crises, my productivity skyrocketed. My senior partner noticed. Within 2 months, I was handed a massive corporate restructuring account, that came with a heavy bonus and a fast track to promotion. Meanwhile, the cracks in the golden couple's facade started to show. It was late November when I ran into Sarah at a high-end grocery store. She looked thinner, her usually immaculate hair slightly frizzy. She was holding a basket with nothing but artisan cheese and a bottle of cheap wine. "Chloe." She stopped in the aisle, forcing a bright plastic smile. "Hi, it's been forever." "Hi, Sarah. You look busy." "Oh, startup life." She let out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Ben works so hard. We're in meetings constantly. It's exhausting, but totally worth it. The app is going to beta testing soon." I knew for a fact that the app didn't even have a functioning wireframe yet. "That's great," I said mildly. "I'm glad it worked out for you both." Her eyes flickered with something dark resentment, maybe, or the very early stages of panic. "Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, Ben was wondering. He asked if you had the contact info for that cheap graphic designer you used to know. The branding agency we hired is charging us an arm and a leg for revisions." The branding agency they shouldn't have hired in the first place. The money was already bleeding out. "Sorry," I lied smoothly. "I lost his number, but I'm sure a high-end startup like yours doesn't want cheap design work anyway." Sarah's smile strained until it looked painful. "Right, exactly. Well, I have to go. Good seeing you." She scurried away toward the checkout. I watched her go, feeling the satisfying, icy thrill of vindication. The water was rising, and they had willingly tied the anchors to their own ankles. The descent had officially begun, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the view. Winter in the city usually felt oppressive, a gray slush that seeped into your boots and your bones. This year, it felt like a victory lap. My promotion to senior financial analyst came through in late February. To celebrate, I bought myself a tailored wool coat that cost more than my first car, and I booked a 2-week solo trip to Kyoto for the spring. My savings account was growing with quiet, compounding dignity. No overdraft alerts, no panicked midnight calculations trying to figure out how to stretch a paycheck across an abyss of credit card minimums. Ben and Sarah, however, were discovering the grim reality of compounding interest. We collided at a mutual friend's engagement party in a converted warehouse downtown. Exposed brick overpriced cocktails, dim Edison bulbs, the exact kind of place Ben used to pretend we belonged. I was at the bar nursing a gin and tonic when the familiar scent of expensive heavy cologne hit me. "You look good, Chloe." Ben slid into the empty space next to me. He was trying for casual, but his posture was rigid. The navy suit he wore was bespoke, a remnant of his early startup spending spree, but it hung a little looser on his frame. The manic energy that fueled him 5 months ago had curdled into something frantic and exhausted. "Thanks, Ben. You look tired." I kept my tone polite, the way you speak to a stranger asking for directions. He flinched. "Startup life. It's a grind. We're in the trenches right now, finalizing the beta launch. The investors are breathing down my neck." He said the word investors with a practiced weight, trying to impress me. I knew the only investor was Sarah's depleted trust fund, backed by a bank loan that was currently accruing interest at 8%. "Well, I'm sure the hard work will pay off," I said, turning my attention back to the bartender. I wanted him to feel the absence of my care. "It will." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Actually, I've been meaning to call you. The accounting firm we hired, completely incompetent. They don't understand tech-focused burn rates. I told Sarah, we need someone sharp, someone who gets my vision. He was looking at me with those wide, earnest eyes. He was actually trying to recruit me to fix his sinking ship. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me laugh. Before I could answer, a hand clamped onto Ben's arm. Sarah stood there. The blonde hair that used to be perfectly blown out was pulled into a tight, severe bun. Her smile was a rictus of tension. She wore a stunning emerald green dress, but I noticed the subtle scuff marks on the heels of her Louboutins. Sarah never wore scuffed shoes. "There you are," Sarah said, her voice an octave too high. "They're passing around the crab cakes. We should mingle. Hi, Chloe." "Sarah." I nodded. "Ben was just telling me about the beta launch." Sarah's grip on Ben's arm tightened visibly. Her knuckles went white. "Yes, it's happening. Very soon." "That's fantastic," I said smoothly. "You must be so relieved, especially with the grace period on that small business loan ending next month. The amortization schedule on $250,000 is a beast once the principal payments kick in." The color completely drained from Sarah's face. She looked at Ben, her eyes wide, with sudden, unmasked panic. "You told me the interest-only period was for 2 years. She hissed at him, completely, forgetting I was there. Ben's jaw clenched. "It is. Chloe doesn't know what she's talking about. She hasn't seen the final term sheet. I read the preliminary paperwork you brought to the cafe, Ben. Clause 4, Section B, 12 months interest only, then fully amortized over 60 months. I took a slow sip of my gin. The ice clinked softly against the glass. "But maybe you negotiated a better deal. You are the visionary after all." "Let's go," Ben snapped, grabbing Sarah's hand and dragging her toward the back of the room. I watched them retreat. A few minutes later, I saw them by the coat check. They weren't mingling. They were arguing. Ben was gesturing wildly, his face flushed red, while Sarah stood with her arms crossed tight over her chest, shaking her head sharply. It was a beautiful, chaotic performance, and I had a front row seat. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it during my lunch break, a frantic, breathless voice filled my ear. "Chloe, it's Sarah. Please call me back. I know things ended weirdly, but I need your help. I think Ben is hiding money from me. I tried to look at the QuickBooks, but he changed the password. Please. I don't know who else to ask." I deleted the voicemail. I wasn't her safety net. I wasn't his collateral. I was just the ghost of the woman they tried to ruin, watching them drown in the flood they created. Summer rolled in like a suffocating blanket. The asphalt radiated heat, matching the rising temperature inside the local tech community. The whispers about Ben's startup had morphed from quiet skepticism into open mockery. The app, meant to revolutionize local delivery logistics, was a buggy, unusable mess. They had burned through the loan money, paying for marketing, sleek office furniture, and developer salaries that Ben kept cutting to save cash. The developers retaliated by delivering garbage code before quitting. My life, conversely, was a quiet symphony of order. My firm had assigned me to lead the due diligence team for a venture capital group looking to acquire struggling startups. It was demanding, meticulous work, and I loved it. On a sweltering Tuesday in July, I sat across from Thomas Harding, a junior partner at the VC firm I was consulting for. We were in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline, reviewing a stack of pitch decks that had been flagged for potential acquisition. Thomas tossed a glossy, professionally bound folder across the mahogany table. It landed in front of me with a heavy thud. "Take a look at this one," Thomas said, rubbing his temples. "They're begging for a buyout. The founder has called me 4 times this week. The valuation they're asking for is delusional, but the core concept might be salvageable if we gut the management team." I opened the folder. The logo, a sleek, minimalist arrow, stared back at me. Underneath it read, "Velocity Logistics, founder and CEO Benjamin Hayes." My heart did a strange, cold flutter. I flipped to the financial section. It was a bloodbath. Accounts payable were 6 figures deep. The $250,000 loan was listed under liabilities, along with 2 newly maxed out corporate credit cards. The revenue column was completely blank. They were entirely insolvent, staying afloat only by deferring payroll and dodging vendor calls. "Well," Thomas asked, "you look like you just smelled bad milk." "I know this company," I said, keeping my voice utterly detached. "I know the founder." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad, if you acquire this company, you aren't buying a product. You're buying debt in a lawsuit waiting to happen." I tapped the financials page. "Look at the burn rate. They spent $60,000 on a branding consultant before they had a working prototype. And this line item here, under client entertainment, that's not business dinners. That's the founder funding his lifestyle." I knew this because I recognized the names of the restaurants. They were the places Ben used to take Sarah when he was pretending to be a successful entrepreneur on my dime. Thomas leaned forward, studying the numbers. He grimaced. "Jesus, it's worse than I thought. The equity structure is a mess, too. Who is Sarah Jennings? She holds 40%, but has no defined operational role. She's the co-signer on the primary debt," I answered smoothly. "She's the bag holder." Thomas shut the folder sharply. "Trash it then. I don't have time for vanity projects run by idiots." I picked up the folder and dropped it into the recycling bin by the door. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the bottom of the plastic bin was the most satisfying thing I had heard all week. The fallout was immediate. Ben had apparently pinned all his hopes on this buyout. When Thomas sent the standard rejection email the next morning, Ben's fragile reality shattered. He cornered me outside my office building that Friday. I was walking toward the subway, holding a coffee, when he stepped out from the shadow of a food cart. He looked horrific. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled button-down shirt that had sweat stains under the arms. His hair was greasy, and his eyes were bloodshot, darting around with a frantic, hunted energy. "You killed it," he snarled, stepping into my path. I stopped taking a calm sip of my coffee. "Excuse me, the buyout Harding was going to make an offer. I know he was. And then, suddenly, he passes. They use your firm for auditing Chloe. I know you sabotaged me." "I didn't sabotage you, Ben. I just did my job. I read your financials." I looked him up and down, letting my disgust show. "Math doesn't lie. You spent $250,000 and built nothing. You sabotaged yourself." "You don't understand," he shouted, drawing stares from passing pedestrians. "It takes time to build something great. You were always so small-minded. You never believed in me." "You're right," I said quietly, stepping closer so only he could hear. "I didn't, but Sarah did. How is she handling the default notices?" Ben froze. The anger in his eyes was suddenly eclipsed by stark, naked terror. "She told you," he whispered. She didn't have to. The loan was structured for a 12-month grace period. It's month 13, Ben. The bank wants their principal. And since you have zero revenue, I tilted my head. Are they putting a lien on her trust fund yet? His silence was a confession. You did this, he hissed, his voice trembling. If you had just signed those papers, if I had signed those papers, I'd be the one drowning right now. I replied, my voice hard as flint. Instead, I'm going home to a quiet apartment I own to sleep in a bed I paid for. Have a good weekend, Ben. I walked past him, leaving him standing on the sweltering pavement. He didn't follow me. He couldn't. The weight of his own failures had finally anchored him to the ground. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, distorting the downtown skyline into a smear of gray and dull yellow. It was late Tuesday afternoon. The firm was quiet, most of the staff having trickled out to beat the impending storm. I was reviewing a quarterly tax projection for a client when my desk phone chimed. Rachel, the lobby receptionist, sounded hesitant. Chloe, there's a woman down here asking for you. She doesn't have an appointment. She says her name is Sarah Jennings, and it's an emergency. My pen hovered over the ledger. A cold, quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. Send her up, I replied. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak door of my office clicked open. Sarah stepped inside. The woman standing before me bore almost no resemblance to the polished, glowing socialite from the engagement party just months ago. Her blonde hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy clip that failed to hold the stray strands out of her face. She wore faded black leggings and a bulky pill-covered gray sweater that swallowed her frame. The designer handbag was conspicuously absent, replaced by a cheap canvas tote. But it was her eyes that told the real story. They were hollow, ringed with bruised purple shadows, darting around my pristine office with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. Nice office, she croaked. Her voice was raspy, like she had been crying for days. Have a seat, Sarah. I gestured to one of the leather guest chairs opposite my desk. I didn't offer her water or coffee. We weren't friends catching up. She collapsed into the chair, clutching the canvas tote to her chest like a shield. She stared at my desk for a long moment, watching the second hand sweep across the face of my desk clock. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. They froze my accounts, she whispered, finally. The words seemed to tear their way out of her throat. Yesterday morning, I went to buy groceries and my debit card was declined. I called my bank. The commercial lender secured a judgment. They put a hard freeze on everything with my name on it. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. You co-signed a high-risk commercial loan, Sarah. The business defaulted. The bank is simply executing the terms of the contract you signed. It's not just the loan. She burst out, her voice cracking. Tears spilled over her lower lashes, tracking through the faint residue of yesterday's makeup. He took out more. Ben took out 3 merchant cash advances using the business checking account. He forged my signature on the personal guarantees. He told me he was handling the finances. He said the beta launch was just delayed. Ah, there it was, the classic Ben maneuver. When the legitimate money ran out, he turned to the predatory lenders, the ones who charged 30% interest and didn't care about business plans, only about collateral. If he forged your signature, you need a defense attorney, not an accountant, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. You should be at a police station filing a fraud report. Sarah let out a bitter, choked laugh. I went to a lawyer. He looked at the operating agreement. When we formed the LLC, Ben had me sign a blanket power of attorney for all business-related financial decisions. The lawyer said proving forgery on the cash advances would take years of litigation and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, money I don't have. My father cut me off when he found out about the initial loan. He said I made my bed. She leaned forward, dropping the tote bag. She planted her hands on my desk, her fingers trembling violently. Chloe, please. I know you hate me. I deserve it. I slept with him while you were together. I helped him hide it. I was horrible. She gasped for air, the panic finally breaking through her composure. But he's going to ruin me. He's talking about filing for bankruptcy. But since the cash advances pierce the corporate veil, they're coming after my personal assets. My car, the condo my grandmother left me, everything. I looked at her trembling hands. 5 years ago, in another life, those hands had held mine, while I died in a hospital bed, waiting for my life insurance payout. What exactly do you want from me, Sarah? Look at the books. She scrambled into her tote bag and pulled out a battered laptop. Just look at the ledgers. You're a forensic genius. Find a loophole. Find hidden accounts. He has to have stashed money somewhere. He can't have just burned through $400,000 in 8 months. Yes, he can, I stated flatly. I saw his burn rate. He rented an $8,000 a month office space. He hired a PR firm. He flew first class to tech conferences in Austin and San Francisco to network. There are no hidden offshore accounts, Sarah. Ben isn't a criminal mastermind. He's just a narcissist with terrible spending habits. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The last desperate sliver of hope in her eyes began to extinguish, replaced by a profound, vacant terror. You knew, she breathed. She slowly pulled her hands off my desk, shrinking back into the leather chair. At the coffee shop, when you told me to invest, you knew the app was garbage. You knew he was going to fail. I knew Ben, I corrected her softly. I knew he required a host to survive. For 5 years, that was me. I simply decided to step aside. You handed him to me, she whispered, the horror fully dawning on her. You let me destroy my life. No, Sarah. I picked up my pen, turning my attention back to the tax ledger. I presented you with an opportunity. You were the one who let your greed and your ego sign the dotted line. You thought you could love him into a millionaire. Now you get to pay his debts. Close the door on your way out. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. The fight was completely gone from her. She picked up the laptop, her movements slow and mechanical, and walked out of my office. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the quiet back inside. Commercial evictions possess a distinct, miserable choreography. They do not happen overnight. They are slow, methodical dismantling processes governed by clipboards and heavy-duty dollies. My firm handled the financial triage for the property management group that owned Velocity Logistics' office building. Because Ben and Sarah had broken a 5-year commercial lease, 6 months in, the landlord had seized all assets left inside the suite to offset the unpaid rent. I was dispatched on a crisp Thursday morning to audit the physical inventory before the auction house cleared it out. Stepping off the elevator onto the 4th floor, the silence was jarring. The frosted glass double doors, which used to proudly display the sleek Velocity Logistics logo, were propped wide open with a rubber wedge. Inside, the illusion of a thriving tech company had been stripped bare. Men in gray utility shirts were slapping numbered yellow auction stickers onto the Herman Miller chairs. the standing desks, and the ridiculous $6,000 espresso machine Ben had insisted was vital for company culture. I walked through the open-plan floor, ticking items off my tablet. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. "You can't take that monitor. It's my personal property." The shout came from the glass-walled corner office. I paused, recognizing the frantic nasal pitch immediately. Ben stood behind a massive mahogany desk, wrestling a curved, ultra-wide computer monitor away from an exhausted-looking man in a gray shirt. Ben looked feral. He hadn't shaved in days. He wore a stained gray t-shirt and jeans that hung loosely off his hips. Buddy let go of the screen. The mover sighed, looking supremely bored. "Everything inside these walls belongs to the property management group until the back rent is cleared. Take it up with the judge. I have the receipt. It's mine." Ben yanked hard. The power cord snapped taut, pulling a ceramic coffee mug off the desk. It shattered on the hardwood floor. "Ben, stop." The voice came from the doorway of the office. Sarah stood there holding a single cardboard box. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. Her skin was sallow, and she simply stared at the shattered mug on the floor with total detachment. Ben froze, breathing heavily. He let go of the monitor. The mover quickly scooped it up and hauled it out the door, giving Sarah a wide berth. "What are you doing here?" Ben snapped at her, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't look at her with affection anymore. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated resentment. "The landlord let me come up to get my grandmother's lamp," Sarah said quietly, gesturing to the vintage brass lamp sitting in her box. "They said it wasn't listed on the company asset sheet." "Great. So you get your lamp, and I lose my entire setup." Ben kicked the remnants of the shattered mug. "If you had just called your father like I asked, we wouldn't be here. A $50,000 bridge loan would have saved the servers. We could have launched next week." Sarah let out a slow, terrifyingly hollow laugh. It echoed against the bare glass walls. "Launch what, Ben?" She asked, her voice eerily calm. "The developers deleted the source code when you bounced their last 3 paychecks. There is no app. There never was. It was just you playing CEO with my money. I was building a brand," he roared, slamming his hands down on the mahogany desk. "You have no vision. You panicked the second things got hard. You're just like Chloe, small-minded, weak." My name, hanging in the air, drew my attention. I stepped fully into the doorway of the corner office, lowering my tablet. "Actually, Ben," I said smoothly, "I think Sarah's vision is finally perfectly clear." They both whipped their heads toward me. Ben's jaw dropped. The color rushed out of his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Did you come to gloat? Did you come to watch us pack?" "I'm here working," I replied, tapping the screen of my tablet. "Appraising your failures for the landlord. This desk, by the way, has a massive scratch down the left side. It drops the auction value by at least 40%. You really should have taken better care of your borrowed things." Sarah didn't look at me. She just stared at Ben. The realization of how completely she had been played, how easily she had destroyed her own life for a man who was now throwing a tantrum over a computer monitor, settled over her like a physical weight. "I'm filing for bankruptcy on Monday," Sarah said to him, her voice dead. "My lawyer said I have to list you as a co-defendant on the fraud claim regarding the cash advances. The marshals are going to serve you at your mother's house." Ben recoiled as if she had slapped him. "You're suing me." Sarah, baby, come on. We're a team. We can beat this. We just need to restructure. Don't call me baby. She backed away, her grip tightening on the cardboard box. Don't ever contact me again. She turned and walked out of the office, her footsteps echoing across the empty sticker-covered floor. She didn't look back. She didn't look at me. She just walked toward the elevators, carrying the last remaining piece of her life that hadn't been liquidated. Ben stood alone in the glass box. He looked from the empty doorway to the shattered mug, and finally, to me. The bravado completely melted away. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked exactly like what he was, a man, standing at the bottom of a very deep hole he had dug with his own hands. Chloe, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, I have nowhere to go. My mom won't let me move back in. I have $20 in my checking account. I looked at him. I searched my chest for a spark of pity, a lingering ghost of the love I had once felt for him. There was absolutely nothing, just the quiet, steady hum of my own heartbeat. I suggest you get a job, Ben, I said softly. I hear the coffee shop down the street is hiring. I turned my back on him and walked back out onto the floor, tapping the final appraisal numbers into my tablet. The storm outside had finally broken, and sunlight was beginning to stream through the rain-streaked windows. Legal proceedings possess a distinct, suffocating atmosphere. It is the smell of lemon-scented wood polish, stale air conditioning, and raw, unfiltered panic. The deposition room on the 32nd floor of the municipal courthouse was entirely devoid of natural light. Fluorescent tubes hummed relentlessly overhead, casting a sickly pallor over everyone seated around the massive oak table. My presence was purely professional. The property management group had retained our firm to provide forensic accounting for their civil suit against Velocity Logistics. They wanted to pierce the corporate veil to hold the founders personally liable for the destroyed office property and the unpaid lease. As the lead auditor, I sat next to the landlord's attorney, a bulldog of a man named Mr. Gable, holding a thick binder of financial ruin. Across the table sat Ben and Sarah. They were separated by 3 empty leather chairs. They hadn't looked at each other once in 2 hours. Sarah was a shell of a human being. Her previously radiant complexion was chalky. She wore a cheap, ill-fitting beige blazer that looked like it came from a thrift store rack. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the grain of the oak table. Ben was unraveling in real time. He was sweating through the collar of his dress shirt. His leg bounced up and down with a frantic, rhythmic energy that vibrated through the floorboards. He had hired a bargain bin defense attorney who looked like he would rather be literally anywhere else. Let the record reflect. Mr. Gable boomed his voice, shattering the tense silence, that Mr. Hayes is reviewing Exhibit D. This is a bank statement from the Velocity Logistics primary checking account, dated October 14th of last year. Mr. Gable pushed a piece of paper across the table. It slid to a stop inches from Ben's hands. Ben didn't touch it. Mr. Hayes. Gable continued adjusting his glasses. Can you explain the wire transfer of $12,000 to an entity listed as Elite Entertainment, LLC? Ben swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. That was for a corporate networking event. Client acquisition. Client acquisition. Gable repeated flatly. He turned to me. Ms. Hastings, could you please clarify the nature of Elite Entertainment, LLC, based on your audit? I opened my binder. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. Elite Entertainment LLC is a shell company registered in Nevada. Its primary operational asset is a luxury yacht charter service based out of Miami. The invoice attached to this wire transfer specifically lists a 5-day rental of a 70-foot vessel, complete with a private chef and premium bar package. Sarah's head snapped up. She stared at Ben, her eyes wide horror, bleeding into her exhausted features. "You went to Miami," she whispered. The microphone in front of her picked up the ragged edge of her voice. "You told me you were in San Jose meeting with angel investors. You missed my birthday because you said you were coding in a motel room to save money." "Sarah, don't," Ben hissed, leaning forward. "This is a trap. They're trying to confuse the timeline." "Nobody is confusing the timeline, Mr. Hayes," Gable said, dropping another stack of papers onto the table. "We have the flight records. 2 first-class tickets to Miami. 1 for you and 1 for a Ms. Jessica Tremblay. According to payroll records, she was hired as your executive assistant 2 weeks prior to this trip." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a final structural beam snapping before the entire building collapses. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. The betrayal was so profound, so layered on top of the financial devastation he had already wrought, that it seemed to short-circuit her brain. She slowly pushed her chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the carpet. "Ms. Jennings, we are not finished," her own lawyer warned softly. "I am," she said. Her voice was dead, hollowed out. "I'm done." She stood up and walked out of the deposition room. She left her purse. She left her coat. She just walked out the door and let it click shut behind her. Ben watched her go, the remaining color draining from his face. He turned back to the table, looking frantically between his lawyer, Mr. Gable, and me. He was searching for a lifeline. He found nothing but cold, hard paper. The plaintiff requests to enter Exhibit E into the record. Gable continued, unbothered by the dramatic exit. A series of 3 merchant cash advances, totaling $80,000, personally guaranteed by Sarah Jennings, but bearing a signature that our handwriting expert has flagged as highly inconsistent. Ben buried his face in his hands. A low, pathetic sob hitched in his chest. I watched him cry. In my previous life, those tears would have broken me. I would have sold my soul to fix his mistakes. Now I just felt a mild annoyance that his weeping was delaying the end of the deposition. The court eventually ruled in favor of the property management group. The corporate veil was pierced easily, thanks to Ben's blatant commingling of personal and business funds. The judge ordered wage garnishments and asset seizures. Sarah's bankruptcy filing went through, but because the cash advances involved fraudulent signatures and malicious intent, the bankruptcy judge refused to discharge that specific debt. She was legally bound to $80,000 of high-interest predatory loans that she had never consented to. Her trust fund was drained to pay off the initial bank loan. Her grandmother's condo was sold at auction. They were chained together by debt long after the romance had curdled into pure hatred. It was a prison of their own making, and the doors were locked from the inside. Autumn returned to the city exactly 1 year later, painting the streets in brilliant, unapologetic shades of copper and gold. The air turned crisp, carrying the scent of roasted nuts from the street vendors and the sharp bite of impending winter. I spent my Saturday morning standing on the hardwood floor of a historic brownstone in the West End. The walls were painted a soft, clean white. Sunlight poured through the original stained glass transoms, casting colorful, fractured light across the empty living room. I held a set of brass keys in my hand. They were heavy cold and entirely mine. Closing on the house had been a seamless process. My credit score was immaculate, my savings account bolstered by my promotion to Director of Financial Strategy easily covered the 20% down payment. The mortgage broker had practically rolled out a red carpet. There were no panicked phone calls, no desperate shuffling of funds, no begging for co-signers, just a clean, quiet transaction that secured my future. To celebrate, I decided to buy a bottle of vintage Bordeaux and a ridiculously overpriced steak. I walked down to the upscale grocer a few blocks away, enjoying the feeling of the crisp wind against my face. My new wool coat wrapped around me like armor. The grocery store was bustling with weekend shoppers. I navigated the aisles, dropping artisan cheeses and fresh produce into my basket. I headed toward the butcher counter at the back of the store. A man in a white apron and a red plastic visor was scrubbing down the glass display case. His back was to me. His shoulders were hunched, moving in tight, exhausted circles with a soapy sponge. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Could I get 2 filet mignons, center cut, please?" The man stiffened. He turned around slowly, the soapy sponge dripping onto the tiled floor. It was Ben. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant spark that used to define his features was completely extinguished. His skin was pale and drawn tight over his cheekbones. Dark, heavy bags hung under his eyes. The white apron he wore was stained with blood and grease. A plastic name tag pinned to his chest read, "Ben, Trainee." We stared at each other, across the glass counter, displaying prime cuts of meat. The ambient noise of the grocery store, the hum of the refrigerators, the chatter of customers, the beep of the registers seemed to fade into a dull roar. His eyes dropped to my coat, then to my purse, then to the heavy brass keys dangling from my fingers. He took in the reality of my life, comparing it to the brutal, inescapable reality of his own. "Chloe," he breathed. His voice was a rasp, broken and small. "Hello, Ben." My voice was steady. It didn't waver. There was no anger left, no vindictiveness. Just a profound clinical observation. He swallowed hard. He looked down at his soapy hands, then back up at me. "You bought a house." "I did. Today, actually." He nodded slowly. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I live in a basement apartment in Queens, with 3 roommates. The garnishments take 60% of my paycheck." I didn't ask. He offered the information like a bleeding wound, desperate for me to acknowledge his suffering. He wanted me to feel sorry for him. He wanted the woman who used to fix his problems to suddenly reappear and throw him a rope. "That sounds difficult," I said simply. "Sarah works at a call center." He blurted out the words, tumbling over each other. "Night shift. She hates me. She curses at me if I try to call her. The interest on those cash advances. It's growing faster than we can pay it. We're never going to get out, Chloe. We're going to die paying for this." He gripped the edge of the glass counter. His knuckles turned white. Tears pooled in his eyes, threatening to spill over. "I made a mistake. I was stupid, and I was arrogant, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sorry. I am so sorry." He was crying now, the tears tracking through the faint dust of flour and sweat on his face. He was begging for absolution. He wanted me to tell him that I forgave him, that it was okay that the universe had punished him enough. I looked at him, really looked at him. I remembered the hospital room. I remembered the text messages. I remembered the absolute callousness with which he had discarded my life to fund his delusions. "Your steaks," I said calmly. "Center cut." Ben blinked the tears, freezing on his cheeks. He stared at me, uncomprehending. The silence stretched between us, thick and unbreakable. Slowly, the realization dawned on him. I didn't care. I didn't hate him enough to enjoy his apology, and I didn't love him enough to grant him forgiveness. He was nothing to me, just a man behind a meat counter. He wiped his eyes with the back of his forearm. His shoulders slumped further in defeat. He turned around, opened the display case, and wrapped 2 thick cuts of steak in brown butcher paper. He printed the barcode, slapped it on the package, and handed it across the counter. "Thank you," I said, placing the meat in my basket. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I paid for my groceries, stepped out into the brilliant autumn sunlight, and walked home. Winter arrived with a brutal biting cold that froze the harbor solid. But inside the brownstone, the ambient temperature held at a perfect 72 degrees. The fireplace crackled loudly, throwing dancing orange shadows against the newly painted plaster walls. Soft jazz played from the speakers hidden in the ceiling, filling the space with a rich, vibrant energy. Sitting cross-legged on the plush rug, a stack of heavy cream-colored holiday cards waited to be addressed. The thick cardstock felt grounding. There was no anxiety tightening the chest when looking at the mail anymore. For years, the sight of a white envelope had triggered a nauseating spike of adrenaline fear, of another final notice, another collection agency, another overdraft fee, caused by an unannounced, reckless withdrawal. Now, the mailbox only held invitations, holiday greetings, and bank statements showing a steadily climbing net worth. The brass knocker on the front door clattered loudly against the wood. Pulling open the heavy oak door revealed Samantha, a senior partner from the firm, shivering violently under a thick wool scarf. She held a silver bakery box in one hand and a bottle of expensive champagne in the other. "It is absolutely freezing out there," Samantha gasped, stepping quickly over the threshold and kicking off her snow-covered boots. "If you didn't have the best taste in wine, I would have stayed in my pajamas and ordered takeout. You're just in time to help me tackle these cards," was the reply, taking the wet coat from her shoulders and hanging it in the hall closet. We migrated to the kitchen. The kitchen island, a massive slab of white quartz, became the staging area for pastries and poured drinks. Samantha hopped onto a bar stool, slicing into a rich, dark chocolate tart. "So, I saw the final docket cross my desk yesterday regarding the property management suit, the one you audited for the firm." Pausing with the champagne flute halfway to the lips, the mention of the case brought a momentary chill to the warm room. And it's a complete bloodbath," Samantha said, around a mouthful of pastry, reaching for a napkin. The state attorney general's office picked up the file. Apparently, those merchant cash advances weren't just secured with forged signatures. The borrower used a fake Social Security number for the secondary guarantor to push the final loan through the automated system. They are officially indicting Benjamin Hayes for felony wire fraud and identity theft. The champagne fizzed quietly against the glass. The words hung in the air, heavy and overwhelmingly final. Felony charges meant federal time. It meant the complete and total eradication of any future Ben thought he had. He wouldn't just be poor. He would be a convicted felon. No bank would ever look at him. No legitimate company would ever hire him. He would spend the next 5 to 10 years in a concrete cell, entirely stripped of the charm and the tailored suits he used to manipulate the world. The man who refused to take a regular job because he was destined for greatness was going to spend his prime years wearing a state-issued jumpsuit. What about his partner? The question slipped out before the thought could be fully stopped. The blonde, Jennings, Samantha shook her head, tapping her silver fork against the porcelain plate. She's claiming victim status, but because she willingly signed the initial corporate documents granting him unilateral power of attorney, she's still entirely on the hook for the civil damages. She avoided jail time, but she'll be paying off that debt until she's 80. I heard her wages at the call center are being garnished at the maximum legal limit. She basically works just to cover the interest penalties. Her credit is annihilated. Looking down at the golden liquid in the glass, a profound, unshakable silence settled over the soul. There was no spike of vindictive glee. There was no urge to laugh or gloat. There was only the clinical quiet satisfaction of a mathematical equation perfectly balancing itself out. They had attempted to steal a life. Now they were paying the ultimate price for it. Good was the only response given. They earned every bit of it. Samantha nodded in agreement, completely unaware of the deep, agonizing history tied to those names. To her, they were just another file on a desk, another cautionary tale of corporate greed and startup hubris. To me, they were the ghosts of a timeline that no longer existed. The conversation seamlessly shifted to lighter things. We talked about the upcoming quarter at the firm, the very real possibility of a trip to the Amalfi Coast in the spring, and the intricacies of decorating a historic home without ruining its original charm. Hours later, after Samantha had braved the cold and headed home, the house settled back into its quiet rhythm. Walking through the hallway, the hardwood floors felt solid and permanent beneath bare feet. Pausing by the front window, the streetlights illuminated the gently falling snow. It buried the sidewalks, covering the dirt and the grime of the city under a fresh, immaculate white sheet. Rebirth is not a magical gift. It is a brutal, conscious choice. It is the decision to look at the fire threatening to consume your life and adamantly refusing to provide the oxygen. The universe had offered a second chance, a rare and impossible ticket out of the grave, and it had not been wasted. Ben and Sarah had built their own cage, locking themselves inside, with nothing but their greed and their mutual deceit. They would spend the rest of their lives suffocating under the weight of the choices they made in the dark. Turning away from the window, the fire in the hearth was dying down to a soft, glowing ember. Tomorrow was a Monday. There was work to be done, money to be made, and a long, beautiful life waiting to be lived. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, breathing was the easiest thing in the world. Revenge isn't always about getting your hands dirty. Sometimes it's just about stepping back and letting toxic people destroy themselves. If you loved watching this ultimate tale of karmic justice unfold, make sure to hit that like button. Right now, share this story with anyone who needs a powerful reminder to protect their peace and their bank account from manipulators. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another deeply satisfying, drama-filled story. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you woke up 5 years in the past?